Welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm happy to be back with you again this week. This is a law enforcement podcast where we discuss topics that will empower you on and off the job. Maybe you're tired, you're frustrated, maybe you feel overwhelmed or struggling to balance your work and home demands. Whatever it is, maybe you simply need some encouragement. Well, then I hope that you have come to the right place. This is the 153rd episode of the podcast. I know every time I give this count every week, I cannot believe how many episodes it's been. But on today's podcast, here's what you can expect. We talk about cops having sex. Again, I bring you an update on a justified use of force and the subsequent largely peaceful protest. And then lastly, the most important thing that every cop needs to do right now. Right now. On the Blue Line starts now. This is your first time listening. Welcome. We have two weekly podcasts. The one you're watching right now is called Morning Roll Call, releases every Monday, and it's a weekly monologue show where you and I just sit down. We discuss the news, recent events, law enforcement trends, and a variety of other topics that hopefully gives you something to think about as you begin your week. Our other show, The Interview Room, it comes out on Thursdays, and in there I sit down with guests from all different walks of life for something that hopefully can be beneficial in either our personal or our professional lives. Last week was the episode with Ernie Stevens. If you haven't listened to that yet, we got some great feedback. Thank you for those who listened and commented on YouTube and Twitter and all over the place, but we got some great feedback. And of course, Ernie's well known as being the star or one of the stars of the HBO documentary, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. So anything in that peer support, CISM, really, if you're in law enforcement, I suggest that you listen to that episode and then check out that documentary, the HBO documentary that Ernie was in. It really is the future of law enforcement, and you're seeing that across the country. So check that out. And then this coming week will be guest Mitchell Tucker, and I will tell you all about him when that comes out. Just know that all these shows are available. They're actually made primarily for video. So if you're not watching on YouTube or Rumble, definitely do that. But they are, of course, put out an audio on all different podcast platforms. So however you're listening to us, thank you very much. And if you need to know more about what we have going on, I encourage you to go to On the Blue Line. That's ontheblueline.com. All right. So I have a few stories that I want to get to in the news portion. And they get crazier and crazier. So we're going to start with this one. This one's coming to us out of New York. Came to us on January 19th. So this woman tells a news outlet that she heard a woman screaming in the parking lot, but she couldn't tell which vehicle they were in. So she hears this woman screaming. Well, officers come out and they go to the area near the 79th precinct of the New York Police Department. It's actually the area where law enforcement parks their personal vehicles before they switch out and get in their agency vehicles that they're going to take out on patrol. So two other officers come out of the precinct to investigate what are these screams. And they found two cops, one male and one female, in the buff inside the car, parked in the lot at Green Avenue and Tompkins Avenue. So the New York Post reported that off-duty officers were found naked in the car after a concerned caller heard hot and heavy cries and called the police. So this woman hears these cries. Law enforcement comes out of the precinct and they find two fellow officers in the personal vehicle parking lot having sex completely naked. Yeah. I mean, the good thing is the article does say they were off duty at the time. Still at work, but off duty. But the story gets a little bit crazier, and the reason I'm bringing it up. So the officers are partners. So they work together. It sounds like they both work in one vehicle. They ride together as partners on the job. However, they've been having an ongoing affair that the article says, quoting, is common knowledge in the precinct. And the reason it's common knowledge is because last summer, yes, 5, 6, 7 months ago, doesn't say which month, last summer, the girlfriend of the male officer, the wife of the male officer shows up and confronts the girlfriend at the precinct, the fellow officer. She's not happy that this is going on. So she has knowledge that there's this affair. She gets pissed off. She goes down to the precinct. The article goes on. Shortly after, in the rear of the precinct, so shortly after this incident last summer where they're yelling and screaming at each other, with bosses and cops present, the two cops got into a huge altercation because of the wife. And then the key to me, and this is a quote, nothing was done. So you have this big ruckus that happens last summer at this precinct. The bosses, so quote unquote supervisors, quote unquote leaders are present. Nothing's done. Well, what are we going to do? I don't know. What could we do? I don't know. Quoting, then someone had the bright idea to have them partnered up, riding in the same sector. And then it goes on to say, it's not known if the cops, they had denied having sex previously, obviously a little hard to deny this time, whether they were disciplined. It said that there's actually no body-worn camera or a report for this incident that occurred, which is required in our department procedure. And that is all the information they have right now, but they are continuing to monitor it. I go back to that word leader or bosses again. This to me, listen, what people do on their own time in their own houses, okay, that's one conversation. A different conversation here is that you've got this issue where you have married law enforcement officers clearly entering into a relationship, an affair, if you would, at work or presumed to. It creates an issue. So you already have a negative working environment. You already have this breakdown that occurs. And then what we decide is the best idea, the best we can come up with in a city the size of New York, is we keep them working together as zone partners. And literally it reads like they call it sector partners, but pretty much in the same vehicle. I don't know. I have no idea sometimes what some of these agencies and people are thinking. And to further confirm my what in the world were we thinking, let me go to now the article that has been all over social media this week. So I'm sure you're already aware of it. There's been meme after hilarious meme on Instagram, Twitter, in reference to the insanity that came out on January 10th, where the Tennessee police officer was fired after wild accusations of a cop threesome on-duty sexual escapades. So we have on one hand the situation in New York where leaders failed to do anything. Here we have an issue where the Tennessee Police Department fired 5 officers and suspended 3 others after wild allegations of sexual escapades, including a Girls Gone Wild style hot tub party. And they say that as a result of this, it's 12% of their officers that they're down due to the scandal. What in the world is going on at these agencies? Listen, I get people, we all make mistakes. We all are fallen creatures. We all have a sinful nature. I understand that. What I don't understand is how some of this goes on in the workplace and the people, nobody stands up and says, hey, this is a bad idea. Where's the leaders? Where's the people in charge that are supposedly keeping this from happening? So here's what's frustrating to me. So here's what this article says. It says that a female Laverne police officer who claimed to be in an open marriage was accused of assorted behavior that included oral sex at headquarters and a menage a trois. This situation is unacceptable, said the mayor. So as soon as it got brought to their attention, they started looking into it and they performed an investigation. So good for the mayor. I'm glad that occurred. The 4 men, they fired 4 men who were included Patrol Officer Juan Lugo Perez, Sergeant, yeah, I said that, Sergeant Lewis Powell, Detective Seneca Shields, and Sergeant Henry Ty McGowan. I am most upset about the 2 sergeants. Where is the leadership? Where is people make mistakes. People do dumb things. We all know, I even mentioned it last week just as an offhand comment. Sex on duty is going to get you fired. You can't do that, period. That's a rule. We all know that if you're in this career. What I have no idea is how 2 supervisors end up wrapped up in this craziness. And then there's K-9 Officer Larry Holliday and Patrol Officer Patrick Magliocco and Patrol Officer Gavin Charborough, both of which I probably mispronounced their names, but they were suspended. The original 4 were fired. So the internal investigation released on December 28th found the tryst, as they put it, took place at the officers' homes, hotels, and parties. One escapade was allegedly carried out during a booze-fueled hot tub party, where Hall reportedly took off her top at one of the officers' houses that included family members of the officers, and a threesome with Magliocco and his wife. She claims, of course, as I had mentioned earlier, to be in an open marriage, but she is married, and there were also 2 reported on-duty affairs. That included oral sex on Powell and Shields at the police station and in the department's gym. And then it says, quoting here, Magliocco admitted to having sex with Hall on numerous occasions and accused her of also bragging about colleague Powell's, quote, big black, yeah, we'll leave it right there. So that's all I have to say on that. These crazy stories that I bring to you week after week after week, so many times are rooted, those type stories are rooted in what we talked about last week. They are rooted in integrity issues and unwillingness to stand up. They're rooted in leadership issues, holding people accountable. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for now because we'll get to it a little bit further in this program. The next incident, the last incident, but they've got several stories about it that I want to bring up, is this issue that is ongoing in the suburbs of Atlanta that I actually had talked about, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks ago on the podcast. And at that point, I was telling you about the trespassers that were hanging out in what they're calling Cop City. And these little forest defenders or whatever they're calling themselves, little protectors of the forest, were refusing to leave the property. So fast forward to this last week. So on the 18th, there was which would have been Wednesday, there was protesters in Atlanta are calling for violence against police officers and law enforcement entities following a police-involved shooting on Wednesday that left a state trooper wounded and 1 man dead. So essentially this Georgia State Patrol trooper wearing a bulletproof vest, thank God, was shot in the abdomen, which we all know they only cover so far down, so probably in the area where his vest didn't go down to, Wednesday morning, and it happened as the police were trying to clear this encampment. So the sweep, which is what was going on, was conducted as an operation to, this is a quote, an operation to identify people who are trespassing and committing other crimes on the property. At about 9 a.m. today, so this was on Wednesday, as law enforcement was moving through the property, officers located a man inside a tent in the woods. Officers gave verbal commands to the man who did not comply, and then shot a Georgia State Patrol trooper. So what happened? Well, what should have happened? Other law enforcement officers returned fire, hitting the man. That seems like self-defense to me all day long, but obviously we, as always, will wait for the investigation to complete, unlike whatever's going on here. But essentially, the Twitter accounts for from the Atlanta Forest was calling for a night of rage to take place last Friday and reciprocal violence to be done to the police and their allies. So they were calling for like a nationwide reciprocal violence in reference to what occurred there at the shooting, because in their opinion and how they're looking at the incident, law enforcement, quote unquote, killed this guy, right? So that's what they're saying here. So their GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, is investigating this thing. During a press conference, GBI Director Michael Register confirmed that the shooting was in self-defense after the now deceased individual opened fire without warning on the trooper. I don't know what difference the without warning makes, but nonetheless, he opened fire on the trooper. They returned fire and they stopped the threat. My words there for the stop the threat part. So as you read down through this crazy thing, a series of tweets come out from this group. So quoting from this group, today, the police shot and killed a forest defender below the canopy of our beloved forest, the group said. No one can bring our friend back to us. An innocent life has been taken and the machines continue. We will not go quietly into this dark night. It's like they've watched too many Batman episodes. So they put out another tweet. Police killed a forest defender today, someone who loved the forest, someone who fought to protect the earth and its inhabitants. This is why we organized to stop Cop City, and we will in honor of their life and the lives of everyone killed and imprisoned by the police. However, they do make a claim that they do not advocate for violence and that no one has been harmed by participants in this movement. I think the article itself contradicts that point since they shot a law enforcement officer. So obviously we are praying for the full recovery. I saw some positive things on the state trooper, but we're praying for a full recovery for the trooper. And thank you for what you do and what you're willing to do and your family. Our prayers and thoughts are with them as well. However, this group decided, now, let me say this. People who agree with the ideology of this group, because we don't know for sure. The problem with these groups is they're very informally put together. So we just know that people who agree with the ideology of this group then carried out what they said. So this one's coming to us from the Daily Wire, came out on Saturday, just this last Saturday, 2 days ago, and alleged far-left activist rioted in downtown Atlanta Saturday night. There were a series of tweets that went out on this. Ian Miles Cheong, I'm probably mispronouncing that one too. Antifa messed around with cops in Atlanta. Antifa found out. There was video of the officers taking people into custody. Andy No, I like a lot of his work. He said, breaking, far-left extremist and Antifa gathering for revenge against law enforcement in Atlanta over the killing of their gunman at the autonomous zone, smashed up businesses and set an Atlanta police vehicle on fire. And there was video associated with that. There was video from Libs of TikTok where they said Antifa is burning down Atlanta right now. And then the one that you're actually watching, if you're watching this on video, this was from someone called Largely Peaceful Protest Three-Sided Story. And it said, local Atlanta reporter calls the protest in Atlanta largely peaceful protest, as a police cruiser is on fire in the background, which is what you're watching if you're watching this on video. So this thing's going up in flames. And again, here we are, the media standing in front of the flames, telling you that what you see with your eyes is not what you see. This is just a protest. People are just disagreeing. This is a First Amendment issue. Yeah, don't worry about that as we burn that stuff down. That's not what's going on here. What you see is not what it is. So then Sunday, another article comes out, and this one's coming from Fox News. However, they're calling out, and the video that you're going to see here is from CNN. They're calling out the silliness of this guest that CNN had on. So I don't know anything. I've been doing more research on this quote unquote autonomous zone than on who these people are who've lost their minds. But this genius goes by the name David Paisner. I don't know. Maybe you know who he is. I have no idea, and I didn't even take the time to search because I frankly don't care. However, he's on CNN talking about how he criticizing the use of the word violent to describe the protest. So here again, with things burning down, this genius is saying, this is quoting, I think that there's a real blurring of the lines in the use of the word violence. Is property destruction violence? To some people, certainly is. But this idea that breaking windows or other acts of property destruction are the same as actual violence against humans, well, it's kind of a dangerous, slippery concept. He goes on, you keep using these words, violent, 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 violent. The only acts of violence against people that I saw were actually the police tackling them protesters. He then stated that the group of rioters was actually a small group of rioters, right? So, that's a key part too. This is just a small segment of the Defend the Forest group. And it says that it was memorializing 26-year-old activist Manuel Esteban Paz Taran, who knows, who was killed in a gunfire exchange Wednesday after allegedly firing at Georgia State Troopers. I think you're at the point you could probably remove the word allegedly since he was actually shot and had a round that hit the officer. So just my takes on the use of the word allegedly. And then this genius goes on to say, as the chief himself said, this is a small group. Also, within this defend the forest movement, there are no leaders. So people just kind of go off. They just do their own thing. So then there's this Libs of TikTok gets involved in a Twitter battle going back and forth on referencing the CNN article where this individual said that we shouldn't use the word violent to describe what we were actually seeing. And of course, they commented back, well, of course they did. What a joke. And then someone else jumped on the bandwagon and talked about, well, our current president said Antifa is just a quoting idea. And then others, of course, jumped on the Twitter bandwagon to talk about how this looked an awful lot like the coverage you saw out of the Summer of Rage 2020, where they were fiery but mostly peaceful protests going on, which, of course, is an oxymoron at best. So Georgia Governor Brian Kemp did come out. He condemned the violence and said that though the state continues to respect peaceful protest, acts of violence against persons or property will not be tolerated. Those committing such unlawful acts will be arrested and prosecuted fully. Good. That's the minimum of what should take place. But I got a few takeaways on this whole thing. And the reason I brought it up yet again is because, first of all, the cognitive dissonance, the place that you have to be at to start thinking that the answer, let's say that any of this ideology was about something other than trying to destroy America, right? You have to start there if you're going to try to dissect this thinking at all. Because the reality is most of these are groups that have one goal and one goal only, and that is to destroy the principles and ideals that America was founded on. That's what most of these groups are all about. Whether you're talking the socialist underpinnings, the fascist underpinnings, the anti-fascist underpinnings, the anarchists, the on and on the list goes, what they all have in common in the way that all these seemingly competing ideologies get to work together is the fact that they all have one fundamental goal, which is the destruction of America. But stepping back from it for a minute, let's pretend like that's not what's going on for just a moment. Then where do you have to get at to have the cognitive dissonance that if your issue is with what law enforcement is doing, that you're going to battle them trying to build a training facility to improve what law enforcement is doing? It makes zero sense. There's no logic in the world that you end up where we're ending up with this stuff by going down that road. In fact, what you start to realize is that the first thing I said is actually the truth. So what this really highlights to me is a breakdown of society. The other thing that this all highlights to me is what we already instinctively know about most media in this country. Rather than being something that informs or fulfills the role of holding people accountable, they're often apologists or propagandists for this anti-American cause that's going on. And again, it doesn't matter which of these groups or what name they're masquerading under today or what cause they think that they are adhering to. They are apologists and propagandists for anti-American ideology. Period. Full stop. The other thing is law enforcement is getting into a more and more dangerous position. This continued breakdown of society is going to affect law enforcement's ability to do its job now and in the future as we continue to allow these kind of things to take place. Frankly, in my opinion, this whole allowing these people to even be in those woods at all has been a problem since I talked about this story a month ago. They need to be trespassed, and we need to do something to make sure that they don't come back. You and your little wood fairies are not allowed to hang out here, whatever you're calling yourself, protectors of the woods, I don't know, gnomes, I don't know. Whatever you are today in the woods, get out of the woods because the training facility is coming. That would be an approach that I would think would be beneficial, but that's just my opinion for what it's worth. But I highlight these stories because sadly, I think that they speak an awful lot to where we're at and what we're focusing on. And then my concern is twofold, as we saw from these stories today, is the leadership issues we have in this country, as well as coupled with the safety issues that we're going to have for law enforcement going forward. So the last thing I want to talk about, kind of off topic, but not really. Last week, I talked about the keywords of integrity and how that shouldn't just be something we put on plaques all over a office or our substations, but rather it's something that we need to actually embody. And I ended with saying that the kind of the key that I'm going to talk about over and over again this year is taking action and standing up. Well, the word that I want to bring up this week, I actually brought up not long ago when I kind of talked about something that I'd speak about, but it's the word resiliency, right? And the reason I'm bringing it up specifically today is that this weekend I had the opportunity to again, which I do kind of quarterly-ish, talk at what we call Academy Resiliency Training at a local law enforcement academy. And in there, they bring together a lot of really smart people and then me. I'm not sure how that works, but they bring together a lot of great people with a lot of experience, smart law enforcement officers, different agencies and different experience levels to talk about building resiliency in different parts of our lives, from the emotional side to the mental side to the physical side, because you're not just one person, the spiritual side. All these things are part of who you are, and it is important to build resiliency. But this word is kind of a catch-all. It's cliche anymore. It's something that you hear people from all over the spectrum use this term resiliency. And I think sometimes we start to tune it out, not knowing what it really means. So first, I want to address a couple misconceptions on resiliency. So first of all, it's not necessarily stoicism. In fact, I would argue that it's not stoic at all, but that's often the mindset we get. We picture a rock, with the ocean waves just battering, maybe something from the coast of Maine where the ocean waves are battering against it. And this immovable rock isn't even being affected by the water. I guess you could argue it is slowly being cut away at by the water, but that's a different analogy than what I'm trying to draw here. But you have this strength of the rock and the waves that are battering against it and nothing is going to move it. That's not what resiliency is. It also doesn't mean, likened to that you're not moved by what is happening. It's not antithetical to empathy or sympathy or to basic human understanding or wanting to know what someone is going through. That's not resiliency either. See, you're going to be affected by things in your career. The goal is that you're able to put in place resources and tools that allow you to bounce back, if you would. Looking at the dictionary, they talk, and I think the last time I spoke about this, I used the illustration of a rubber band that I've used in the past, how you can extend it to its furthest point and let go. And the idea is that it returns to what it normally is, its normal elasticity. And when you look up the word resiliency and look for synonyms of it, you see words like flexibility, pliability, plasticity, durability, ability to last, sturdiness, toughness, flexibility, or the ability to bounce back, bounce back ability. I didn't even know that was a word, but according to this, it is. The opposite was rigidity, right? So if an antonym is rigidity, then much like that rock, that's not what we're talking about. Rather, you're going to be affected by the things that you see and do in this career. But the goal is that with the tools and resources we put in place, we're able to return. We're able to get back to who we are. What are you doing? What are you doing to increase resilience in your life and in preparation for this profession? If you're coming into this profession, this is a very important conversation. What are you doing to increase resilience? I wish that I had something like the Academy Resiliency Training when I came into this. Of course, it probably would have changed my path a little bit. Part of what brought me to this podcast around the 7-year mark in this career was seeing how the job itself was starting to change me. But if you're coming into this career, these are questions you need to start asking yourself. What are you going to do to build resiliency mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally? What actions do you take now or need to start taking to decompress and to reset? And how often do you practice them? What are the resources? What resources do you have or are you aware of if you needed someone to talk to? If something happens, you go to a bad scene, you start seeing things in your personal life, maybe you're starting to see some addictive behaviors. Who do you go to? Who do you talk to? Do you have their numbers on speed dial? Do you have them on your refrigerator? Do you have them somewhere that you can access them? Do you know who you would call? Maybe it's the chaplains. Do you have their number handy? Maybe for you, you'd rather talk to someone in peer support. Do you have their number? If you work at a small agency or somewhere where you're like, well, we don't really have those kind of resources, or the resources we have I don't trust because they're tied to the agency, well, then there are several third-party law enforcement organizations out there that are not tied specifically and intentionally to law enforcement agencies for this very reason. And a lot of times they offer services that you can access through grants and through different things, sometimes at no cost to you. In fact, I'm working on building out a resources page on the website for this very reason. I don't know that it'll be up by the time this episode releases, but you can always reach out to me at feedback@ontheblueline.com, and I can try to pair you up with some of these groups that are out there. But do you know who you would call in a moment? And are you building a community around yourself? Instead of withdrawing like so many of us do in law enforcement and withdrawing from others, withdrawing from the people in our lives, do you have a good mix of friends and acquaintances, both in and outside of the profession? Those are just a few of the things that when we talk about resiliency, I want you to think about. And I don't want to make this an extremely long episode, so we're not going to go deep into this today. But the last thing that I really want you to think about is that the responsibility is yours. The responsibility to having these things in place, to becoming more resilient, is 100% yours. So resiliency has become a buzzword. It's a cliche term used by groups, outlets, and figures across the country in a variety of different settings. However, the concept of resiliency and the need for what it describes is absolutely necessary, in my opinion, for every law enforcement officer. We all know that law enforcement is a career where the life expectancy by some studies is 10 to 15 years less than the general population. We know that it is one of those careers where you have a statistically greater chance of succumbing to self-harm than to being shot in the line of duty. And we all know of story after story we can tell of officers who have lost their careers due oftentimes to things that could have been curbed early on, if not for the actions that they took in response to things that they experienced in this career. Addictions, health issues, DUIs, domestic incidents, even some of the bizarre sex stories that I spoke about this week at the beginning of the program could all be impacted by officers building resiliency into their lives. The career will affect you. It will affect you. I would venture to say that that is true without exception. Obviously, for the effects can be more pronounced for some and more life-altering for others, but the career will affect all of us in some way. Knowing this, what are you doing to safeguard yourself, to build resiliency in your life? And if you're a supervisor, I would argue that you have a duty to mentor those under your supervision. Listen, I understand not everyone may be receptive or listen or want to do exactly what it is that you're suggesting, but if you're not at least having the conversations, then in my opinion, you're failing as a leader. Full stop. You're failing as a leader. Recently, we realized that everything we are doing at On the Blue Line revolves around this one massive transformative purpose, and that is to create a world where the life expectancy of law enforcement is equal with the general population. And I know that's a lofty, crazy goal, but if we're going to try to reach those kind of world-changing goals, this is where it starts. I'll have more on this in the coming weeks because I know we just begin to scratch the surface on these conversations, but I wanted to give you something to consider for now. And we're going to begin to dive deeper into this and offer some specific steps in subsequent episodes throughout the year. So that does it for this week's Morning Roll Call. I'll see you Thursday in the interview room and next Monday in Morning Roll Call. But in the meantime, I'll see you out there on the Blue Line.